The Highland Clearances were a dark chapter in Scottish history, spanning from the mid-18th to the mid-19th centuries. This period marked a significant and tragic transformation in the Scottish Highlands. Thousands of Highlanders were forcibly evicted from their ancestral lands. Families who had lived on these lands for generations were suddenly uprooted. This period saw the brutal displacement of a people and their way of life. Traditional Highland villages were left abandoned, and the crofts that once bustled with life fell silent. This was done in the name of economic progress. Landowners sought greater profits, often at the expense of the people who had worked the land for centuries. They replaced tenant farmers with large-scale sheep farming. The introduction of sheep farming was seen as a more profitable use of the land. The impact on the Highland communities was devastating. Homes were destroyed, and the social fabric of these communities was irreparably damaged. Many were forced to emigrate, facing harsh conditions in the New World. The journey across the Atlantic was perilous, and the new lands were often unwelcoming. The clearances were not a singular event. They were a series of forced evictions that unfolded over generations, each wave bringing more suffering. They were a series of forced evictions that unfolded over generations. Families packed their belongings, often with little notice, and left the only homes they had ever known. The motives behind these clearances were complex. While economic factors were significant, there were also social and political dimensions to consider. Economic factors played a significant role. The rise of sheep farming offered landowners the potential for greater wealth, transforming the economic landscape of the Highlands. The rise of sheep farming offered landowners the potential for greater wealth. This new agricultural practice was seen as more efficient and profitable. This contrasted with the traditional clan system. The clan system, which had been the backbone of Highland society, was now viewed as outdated. This system was seen as outdated and unprofitable by the increasingly anglicized landowners. These landowners, influenced by English economic practices, sought to modernize their estates. The human cost of the clearances was immense. Families were torn apart, communities were shattered. The cultural and social impact was profound and long-lasting. The trauma of this displacement continues to resonate with many Scots today. The memory of the clearances is a painful reminder of a lost way of life. Understanding the clearances requires examining the reactions of those who witnessed them. Contemporary accounts provide a window into the suffering and resilience of the Highlanders. This includes the average English person. How did they perceive the events unfolding in the Highlands? How aware were they of the events unfolding in the North? Did the English public understand the full extent of the suffering? Did they empathize with the plight of the Highlanders, or were they indifferent to their suffering? The varied reactions of the time reflect the complex nature of the clearances and their lasting impact on Scottish history. The driving force behind the Highland clearances was economic change. This period marked a significant transformation in the Scottish Highlands, where traditional ways of life were upended by new economic imperatives. The traditional Highland economy was based on subsistence farming and cattle rearing. Families grew just enough to feed themselves and relied on cattle for additional income, creating a delicate balance with their environment. Clans held land in common. They owed allegiance to their chief, who was responsible for the welfare of the clan members. This system fostered a strong sense of community and mutual support. This system was ill-suited to the emerging market economy of the 18th century. The new economic model demanded efficiency and profitability, which clashed with the communal and subsistence nature of Highland life. English landowners, eager to capitalize on the growing demand for wool, saw an opportunity in the vast open spaces of the Highlands. The global market for wool was booming, driven by the textile industry. Sheep farming was a much more profitable use of land than traditional Highland practices. The introduction of large-scale sheep farming promised higher returns for landowners. Sheep required less labor and could graze on marginal land. This made them an attractive option for landowners looking to maximize profits with minimal investment in labor. This economic logic led to the displacement of thousands of Highlanders. Families who had lived on the land for generations were forced to leave their homes. Their small farms were consolidated into large sheep runs. These vast tracts of land were now dedicated solely to sheep farming, altering the landscape and the way of life. These were managed by a handful of shepherds. The new system required far fewer people to manage the land, leading to widespread unemployment among the displaced Highlanders. The shepherds were often brought in from the Scottish lowlands or even England. This further alienated the local population, who saw outsiders taking over their ancestral lands. The shift to sheep farming had a profound impact on the social fabric of the Highlands. The close-knit communities that had thrived for centuries were now fragmented. It destroyed the traditional clan system. The bonds of kinship and mutual support that had defined Highland life were irreparably broken. This system had provided a safety net for its members for centuries. Without it, many Highlanders found themselves vulnerable and without support. Evicted tenants were left with few options. The loss of their homes and livelihoods forced them to make difficult decisions about their future. They could try to find work on the sheep farms. However, these jobs were scarce and often went to outsiders, leaving many Highlanders without employment. These jobs were scarce and poorly paid. The working conditions were harsh and the pay was insufficient to support a family. They could migrate to the burgeoning industrial centers of the lowlands. This option offered the promise of work but required leaving behind their homes and communities. This meant abandoning their language and culture. The move to the lowlands often resulted in the loss of Gaelic and the erosion of traditional Highland customs. Or they could emigrate, often to the Americas or Australia in search of a new life. This was a daunting prospect, involving long journeys and the uncertainty of starting over in a foreign land. Despite these challenges, many Highlanders showed remarkable resilience. They adapted to their new environments, carrying with them the traditions and values of their homeland. The legacy of the Highland Clearances is still felt today. The modern-day Highlands bear the scars of this tumultuous period, but they also stand as a testament to the enduring spirit of the Highland people. The physical distance between the Scottish Highlands and the bustling cities of England played a significant role in shaping public perception. News traveled slowly in the 18th and 19th centuries. It often arrived weeks or even months after the events had occurred. The plight of the evicted Highlanders was simply not a pressing concern for the average English citizen. They were preoccupied with their own lives and challenges. The English education system at the time did little to foster awareness of Scottish affairs. Scotland, while part of the United Kingdom, was often seen as a remote and foreign land. Its history and culture were poorly understood by the English public. This lack of knowledge contributed to a sense of indifference towards the events unfolding in the Highlands. Moreover, the dominant narrative about the Highlands often portrayed them as a wild and lawless region, inhabited by backward and superstitious people. This stereotype, perpetuated by literature and travelogues, made it easier for the English public to dismiss the suffering of the Highlanders. The clearances could be justified as a necessary step in taming a savage land and bringing progress to a backward people. Section 4. Through the looking glass of the press, varied narratives emerge. Despite the general lack of awareness, the Highland clearances did not go entirely unnoticed in England. The events, though distant, managed to seep into the consciousness of the English public through various channels, including word of mouth and sporadic newspaper reports.
Newspapers, though limited in their reach, did report on the evictions. These reports, however, were often contradictory and reflected the biases of the publications and their readership. Some articles were sympathetic, while others were dismissive, creating a fragmented picture of the events.
Some newspapers, particularly those with ties to the landed gentry, presented the clearances as a necessary evil, a painful but ultimately beneficial process of modernization. They argued that the transformation of the Highlands was essential for economic progress and the greater good of the nation.
These publications emphasized the economic benefits of sheep farming and the supposed backwardness of the traditional Highland way of life. They portrayed the evicted tenants as lazy and resistant to progress, suggesting that they had brought their misfortune upon themselves. The narrative was crafted to justify the actions of the landlords and to downplay the human cost of the clearances.
Other newspapers, often those with a more liberal or radical bent, offered a more sympathetic view of the Highlanders' plight. They condemned the brutality of the evictions and highlighted the suffering of the displaced families. These publications sought to humanize the Highlanders and to draw attention to the injustices they faced.
These publications challenged the economic justifications for the clearances, arguing that they represented a heartless pursuit of profit at the expense of human lives. They called for greater empathy and understanding, and for policies that would protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them.
The contrasting narratives presented in the English press highlight the complex and often contradictory reactions to the Highland clearances. These varied perspectives reflect the broader societal debates of the time, revealing the deep divisions in public opinion and the power of the press in shaping those opinions. Section 5. Voices of dissent, seeds of sympathy and outrage. While indifference might have been the dominant reaction, there were voices of dissent within England that spoke out against the injustices of the Highland clearances.
Some individuals, moved by accounts of the evictions, expressed their sympathy and outrage in letters, diaries, and public forums. These individuals saw the clearances as a moral outrage, a violation of basic human rights.
They condemned the actions of the landlords and called for government intervention to protect the Highlanders.
Religious groups, particularly those with a strong evangelical tradition, were often at the forefront of this movement. They saw the suffering of the Highlanders as a call to action and actively campaigned for their relief.
Some English writers and intellectuals used their platforms to raise awareness about the clearances and challenge the prevailing narratives that justified them. They wrote articles, poems, and novels that humanized the Highlanders and exposed the cruelty they endured.
These works helped to shift public opinion, albeit slowly, and sowed the seeds of empathy and understanding.